Tuning your vehicle is an essential part of a racing game. In order to perfect the vehicle's handling towards your personal preference, tuning is essential. And in today's video, I'm going to go over some of the essentials for tuning, suspension, and aerodynamics in order for handling in Gran Turismo Sport. Now in this video, I will be covering a handling model focused on stability and neutral cornering. So if you prefer a car that is more oversteery, this video will help you to learn how to do that, but it won't show you how to exactly set up a car for that. Let's talk about brake balance first. So brake balance allows you to adjust the brake bias to be more front biased, which will lead to a more understeering approach under braking, or rearwards, which would lead to a more oversteery approach during braking. My personal preference is to leave brake bias alone and leave it right in the middle. Some cars, it will be good to have a little more rearward bias of a braking system, but that is all up to you to decide under your own handling. But for most vehicles, I leave brake bias at 0. Now moving on to suspension, let's talk about ride height first. Ride height is something that you want to be low so that your center of gravity is low as possible. However, you do not want to lower the vehicle too much to risk bottoming out your suspension and unsettling the vehicle under heavy bumps. Next up, we have natural frequency, which is basically the spring rate. Now, spring rate will allow you to adjust the stiffness of the springs. Now, I tend to gravitate towards a higher spring rate. What this means is the spring is much harder to compress, which will allow for less body roll and play in the suspension and a more tight, smooth driving experience. So, on this vehicle, for example, the Camaro Z01, I definitely think it's a good idea to stiffen up the stock suspension. This is a really important step for road cars if you wanted to minimize understeer and maximize grip. Now in this car, I have it set to 2.4 in the front and then 2.35 in the rear. You want the rear to be just a little bit lower than the front in order to minimize oversteer, especially under braking and initial turn-in. To have a higher spring rate in the rear than in the front will really lend to an unsettling the rear end of the car. Next up, let's talk anti-roll bars. Now in my car, I have this set to 9 and 9. You do not want these to be too stiff because then the car will have absolutely no roll at all and will not be able to control itself as well as with a little bit of play. Now if you prefer a more oversteery car, you can step this up to 9 in the front and 10 in the rear. And if you want a little more understeer and a little more forgiving of the back end, you can have it 9 in the front and then 8 in the rear. Now let's talk about damping ratio, starting off with compression. What this means is when the front end of your car hits a bump, a higher compression ratio will slow the amount of movement that the shock absorber has to deal with. So what you want this to do is, this works well in combination with the high spring rates. If you have a slow damper ratio, it will allow the car to not be unsettled by large bumps in the road. Now, I have it set to 65 in the front and 64 in the rear. Same thing with the anti-roll bars, you want a little less in the rear, and if you wanted a little more oversteer, put a little more in the rear. The same thing goes for rebound. Rebound is on once you have hit the bump and the shock absorber has to rebound all of the fluid in it when the car gets back to a normal level road. This also, you want this to be slow so that the transition is smooth and even. I have this set to 95 in the front and then 94 in the rear. This is the same idea as compression, just for rebound. Now let's talk negative camber. Negative camber is a very important step in terms of vehicle handling, as it allows to, as the front tires are under load, it allows the compression to, as you turn in one direction, maintain the contact patch of the tire on the road. What this means is you maximize the amount of tire on the racetrack. So when you turn right, for example, and you have negative camber, what happens is, as the vehicle turns in that direction, the tire will start to move and therefore increasing that contact patch. This is why negative camber is an important step. Now, and personally, on road cars, I keep negative camber to about 1 degree front and rear. Too much negative camber will actually worsen your contact patch, as the tire will not be able to move enough to actually take advantage of this. So on lower speed cars, you don't need as much camber, as they don't hit the higher G-forces required to actually move the tire enough to require excessive amounts of negative camber. But on higher speed cars, LMP cars, Formula 1 cars, you want a lot of negative camber as these cars will be really pushing those tires. Last up, let's talk about toe angles. Now, for the front, you want 0 degrees of toe. I personally found that this is the most balanced setup. If you want a vehicle that is more focused on oversteer and you find that with 0 degrees of toe, you have too much understeer, what I recommend doing in this situation is increasing the toe out. Now what this will do is increase negative toe, and what that is the front of your front wheels will be pointed outwards. So what this will do is it will increase the amount of oversteer your vehicle will have and decrease understeer. So I would only recommend putting about 0.05 or 0.10 degrees of negative toe and see if that will help fix your understeer issues. For the rear, I recommend putting about 0.50 degrees of positive toe in the rear. Now what this does is it points the front of the rear wheels inwards slightly. This is called positive toe, and what it will allow is to reduce oversteer in the rear end. By increasing positive toe in the rear, you help reduce oversteer on corner exit, and this is very important because after you've hit an apex and you're starting to accelerate out of the corner, this toe angle will really help limit the amount of back end movement you get. Moving on to aerodynamics, this is important as well, but this is thankfully very simple. If you are on a more downforce focused racetrack, you want more downforce, so you increase the amount of downforce, which will decrease your top speed but increase your cornering ability. This works well on lower speed tracks such as Scuba or Laguna Seca, and I personally find that more downforce helps on the Nürburgring with the amount of corners on the track has. However, for higher speed circuits such as Spa or Monza, it's very important to have lower downforce levels, as those tracks are focused on high speed straights. What you want is to have a lower downforce setting so you increase your top speed. This will slightly reduce your cornering ability, but it's worth it because of the amount of lap time gain you get from the increased speeds in the straights. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. I really hope this one was really informative and helped you learn how to tune the suspension, aerodynamics, and brakes in your vehicle. This is just what I've learned from my month or two of playing GT Sport, and this applies to other racing games as well, except they will probably use different terminology. If you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment, that would be much appreciated, and if you could subscribe to the channel, that would be amazing as well. Alright, so that's it for this one. I will see you guys in the next video.